Right. So, hello, Amber. Welcome to my show, One for the Road. This episode is going to be slightly different, but it's such an important subject. So, I'm really, really grateful you've joined me today. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
I'm okay. I'm looking forward to this episode, but it's going to be very emotional to give people the heads up. Um, and I'm really grateful that you have come on to share your story. Shall we start right in the beginning? What it was like for you growing up and your sister Hannah as well?
Yeah, let's go straight in. Hannah was 16 years older than me. She was from my mum's first marriage, but she moved in with me, my mum, and my dad from maybe I was about 4 or 5. She moved in with us. So it was a lovely little unit of four, and a lovely sort of permanent fixture. Obviously being very much younger than her, I terrorized her completely. There's actually a picture of her trying to sunbathe, and I'm sat on top of her with a water pistol. So
Oh,
that goes to show. But as we grew up, she was just that permanent fixture in my life. She was there every Christmas Day. She was just always there, and she moved out roughly when I was 8 years old. And I remember when we dropped her over to her flat, I was crying because I didn't want her to move out. And she said, "It's all right. We'll say like night night to each other at 8 p.m. every night." And I remember going home and it hit 8 o'clock at night. And I looked at the clock and I was like, night night. And I carried this out for years and years and years. But Hannah having her in place meant that I could go over for sleepovers, which are absolutely fantastic as well.
yeah, yeah.
Um, but we've always remained very close. And in 2009, my dad passed away when I was 14, and that sort of cemented our relationship, even made it even stronger. She sort of stepped up in the sort of sense that she became another parent, so she supported my mum a lot, kept things afloat. She also came to a lot of the parents' evenings, and obviously at that age as well, you're hormonal, everything's going on. And not having my dad, it was really, really difficult. I was probably a bit of a daddy's girl, if I'm honest, as well. um, but I can't remember a time when I was struggling and she wasn't there. She was always there. And she had these famous lines that she'd go, "Who is it? Who's upset you? I'll break their legs."
Yeah,
Um, and it's something I still think of now when someone's maybe like upset me or upset. I'm like, "It's all right. Hannah will sort it for me."
yeah,
But there was just this, I can never describe it, just this bond between us. And the laughs we used to have, I don't think anyone could make me laugh like that. And the pranks we used to pull on each other, it was just, when I look back, it was such a happy childhood. Like I'm really, really grateful for that. She was just so much fun to be around.
yeah.
And yeah, just a brilliant person.
Sounds like your rock.
Yeah, she was. And there was lots of things that maybe sort of thought, oh, I don't want to tell mum because I don't want, to upset mum or put anything on mum's plate. So I'd go to Hannah, and there was we did everything, like everything together. Obviously at times being sisters you fight and stuff, but I remember a lot of our summers we spent sitting in the conservatory at mum's, and we were just laughing. There was just so much laughter, and we were out with the dogs walking. And it was even in the midst of losing my dad, she was this sort of permanent fixture that was always there. And yeah, I can't describe it. She was just something else. She was great fun.
Yeah, sounds like it. So with the sleepovers as well. So did you ever notice anything different?
um, I always knew she liked a glass of wine.
Mm,
And she always struggled with her eating as well. So, sort of when we'd have sleepovers, I'd be really excited because we'd get cakes, we'd get crisps, and it's like a child's dream. But Hannah
mm,
would never really have a dinner. She'd have a few crisps or some cream crackers, and
right.
that would be it. And then there'd be like a glass of wine or a bottle of wine sort of on the side.
Yeah.
And I was always sort of aware. So sometimes on Saturday nights, especially if it was one of our birthdays, if it was my dad's birthday, um, he'd always like to get a Chinese. So we'd get a Chinese in, we'd all sit round. Hannah would bring over a bottle of wine. My mum can have a glass of wine, she gets a headache, so she's straight out. She doesn't touch it. Hannah would have the glass, ask mum if she wanted any more, and then she'd be like, "No, I don't want any, Hannah." And then it'd be like, "Oh, sorry, I'll finish it off then."
Yeah.
So I sort of started to notice that there was like white wine was always a theme, and it always cropped up at certain things. But obviously, sort of, there was so much going on at the time, and then she started studying for her degree, that you didn't really notice it as much because she was busy with that. But when she
Yeah.
was with us on a Saturday night and staying over, or if I was at a sleepover, there was always some bottle in the corner somewhere.
And remind us how old you were then.
Sleepovers were probably from 10, and then yeah, 10 onwards. And then when my
Yeah.
dad died at 14, and then it seemed to get more intense
Yeah.
after I was 14. And I remember, I think when I was in 16, 17, I was out for like New Year's Eve with my college friends, and Hannah kept trying to ring me, but ring me relentlessly, relentlessly, and I kept leaving all these voicemails. And she was with my mum, and when I got back, my mum actually said that Hannah had drunk so much she was actually frightened of her. And it was the first sort of time I thought, oh, um,
Yeah.
should I have been there? Like, what's going on? Like,
Yeah.
should she just get too drunk and not know what was going on? But I remember my mum saying she did feel very, very uncomfortable at that point, and probably around, say, when I was at college, it become more enhanced, and I started noticing a lot more.
Yeah. And what was your relationship with alcohol like at the time? Was you like your mum?
Yeah, I've never really been bothered by it.
Mm.
Um, I just I've had a very strange relationship with alcohol, and I have gone sober now on the 9th of April. And I could just never be bothered with it. I didn't like the hangover. There was just nothing about it. So you'd sort of think at 16, 17, away from my mum's, I'd be like, yeah, like some teenagers do, but I just like my orange juice.
Mm.
And maybe it was aware of the white wine and that wine being there and seeing like how it could change. Maybe that
Yeah.
had some form of impact. But no, I've never been that bothered by it.
Well, firstly, congratulations as well on going sober.
Thank you.
We can talk about that later. So that was the real first sign, maybe, that things were changing for your sister, and also your mum being aware and saying that she was quite frightened by seeing that, because it can be scary seeing someone drunk, you know? So what happened after that?
So when I was at college, my mum, she's absolute diamond. She used to pick me up from the college bus every day and take me there to get it. And it was in the town where Hannah lived. And sometimes when I'd get off the college bus, it was 5 o'clock, and I'd start noticing Hannah was there and mum was meeting her. So I'd be like, oh, what's going on? What's sort of happening? And Hannah was sort of struggling with her mortgage at that point. Um, so mum was taking out money to help her pay for her mortgage. And at the same time, I had a part-time job in our supermarket down the road. And I used to work Friday night shift and Saturday morning. And I started noticing that Hannah was buying bottles of wine. And in my head, I was like, how can you be buying bottles of wine if you can't afford your mortgage?
Mm.
And I actually, when I look back, I subconsciously picked a till that looked down the alcohol aisle, specifically the wine aisle, because I was like, I wonder if I'm going to catch her. Because
Yeah.
I think she sort of caught on and she started going to other tills. So she'd go to the tills behind me so I couldn't see her. But I was like, oh, I'm just going to see. And it was always 4 or 5 bottles of wine. And I'd come home and I'd be like, Mum, I, I saw Hannah buying 4 or 5 bottles of wine. And I was like, I said, she can't be drinking all that herself, surely. Like mum gets a headache after one glass of wine, so why does she need that amount? And this sort of like continued on and on. And I remember there was one Christmas Eve where um it was awful. It was awful when I look back. And um we were we'd all gone to bed. Hannah was staying over, and we had port in the house, and Hannah always liked port and lemonade. And it was quite late, and we kept hearing, because we're in a bungalow, you kept hearing like rustling to the kitchen, and it was like the dogs were sort of whinging and stuff, and mum sort of went out to see what was going on, and Hannah was drinking port, and it was like midnight, and going and getting like a glass of port and going back to her room. And mum was like, what are you doing? What's going on? And her phone was going off, and there was all this stuff going on. And I remember them starting to like shout at each other. So Christmas Day, when we woke up, there was just this tension in the house. It was, and I remember laying there on Christmas Eve in bed thinking, I wish my dad was here, because perhaps if my dad was here, this wouldn't be happening.
Yeah.
Um, And these things started to happen where it created this real divide between us. Um, and I was obviously growing up, I was getting more of a probably a grumpy teenager back then.
Yeah.
So it was probably uncool to be around Hannah as much, but Hannah sort of stemmed off in a different direction. And I couldn't quite put my finger on it. But I remember that evening and I remember crying in my bed, wishing that my dad was there and not understanding what was going on.
Oh, darling, that sounds really difficult for you. And Christmas Day as well, and it's hard, isn't it? Because I'm sort of hearing it from Hannah's perspective of the constant topping up.
Yeah.
If there was no more wine left, and I've heard of stories of people going into the ouzo and topping it up with water, and it goes cloudy, and you're caught out, so you end up drinking the lot. Like all these little things we do to get our next hit. So
Yeah.
I can sort of hear it from both sides. It's really a difficult thing to hear.
Yeah. And you used to say to her, like, why do you need that?
Yeah,
Why do you need that? And and then it was like, oh, I'll just finish the bottle,
yeah,
and the bottle had to finish by the evening was out. It couldn't be left to the next day. It always had to be finished. And I think that was 2013 Christmas Eve, that poor incident. And I just I couldn't get over it. And I just thought, it's midnight. Why do you need port at midnight?
yeah.
It just couldn't wrap my head around it. It was completely bizarre.
Well, because you were not a drinker.
Yeah,
It's like me when I see people betting their wages on a horse, and it's like, why would you do that? Like, or they win 100 quid and then put that on the next one and lose it again. Like, because I'm not a gambler, I don't understand it. So I
yeah,
think you're probably coming from that way with you is that, why do you need to drink port? Well, that's all that was left in the house. And,
yeah.
until you pass out, nothing's enough. Do you know what I mean?
No, and then on Christmas Day, we always used to get a stocking each. Even when Hannah was in her 30s, and from a child, I used to run in, dive on her bed, wake her up, like, we've got our stockings. And I remember that Christmas. I know I think maybe 18, 19 at that point, but I still enjoyed going into her because it felt like a routine that was associated to my dad when he was there on
Yeah,
Christmas
yeah,
Day, and I didn't go into her, and we stayed away and she didn't speak to us. And I remember sat with mum and I was like, is this what it is now? Is this how things are changing?
yeah. It's sad, isn't it? So keep going then with the story. How did that manifest out?
She started in a relationship around that point. And I think for me, everything with that relationship, it started to change. And at first we were like, brilliant, this is probably what she needs. She'd finished her degree at that point as well. We'd had a couple more bereavements during that period as well. So there was lots of emotion as well. But things sort of looked positive. She had a degree, she had this partner come into her life, and we were like, oh, finally, something is going right for Hannah. Like, she completely deserves it. And she just become very, very distant. And she was always so close to me and my mum. They'd always go out on shopping trips. And I remember I used to stay at home with my dad and play on his motorbike because I didn't want to go shopping and rather climb trees. But I remember, we always had such a great relationship, but it seemed to become distant. And Hannah sort of didn't really like answer any of our calls. Nothing was going on. We couldn't really get hold of her. And mum was like, why don't you just pop round and see her? And this was about summer 2014. And I popped round to her flat. And she used to have like these beautiful curtains up on the front door, like the glass door, and they were gone. And I managed to open that. And then it got to this wooden door. And there was the letterbox. And I was like, oh, just like see if I can see through or knock on something. And I looked through and it was completely empty. The flat was completely empty. Like, where I could see where her bed was or like anything, it was completely all gone. And I rang mum, I was like, it's nothing there. She's gone. Like, what's going on? And she hadn't been asking for any money for quite a while at that point. And we actually ended up Googling her address. And I didn't know this at the time, but when someone is repossessed, when they come in, they put yellow tape over like the sink or the toilet, and it's got do not use.
Right.
And we found these images, and it had like do not use and all this sort of stuff blocked off. And one of my friends like Googled it for me because I was talking to them about it. And me and mum were chatting away what it could be. And mum was like, "Has she been repossessed?" And we were like, "No, no." And my friend messaged and they were like, "Amber, this is repossession tape. This probably means Hannah's being repossessed." And then we didn't know where she was. Like, potentially she'd been repossessed. All her belongings had gone, and we didn't know where she was. So we popped round to her partner's house, and she'd moved in there. And we ended up having a bit of an argument, me and Hannah, because I was like, "Why didn't you tell us? What is going on?" And I remember it was 11:30 in the morning, and she was still in her pajamas. And that might seem a lazy morning to some, but Hannah was always very pristine. Like, she would be in
Yeah.
her pajamas, but then she'd want to get ready. She'd have her hair nicely done. She'd have her makeup done. I was like, what is going on? Like, why aren't you talking to us? And we sort of had a bit of a scuffle and left. And we were like, okay, things have obviously gone wrong, but at least she's got somewhere to live.
Yeah.
Um, and this sort of went on for the next year. And Hannah sent me some really like nasty texts at some point, and it wasn't like Hannah. Like, Hannah would never say those things, and I got really angry and argued back with her. And for me, at that point, I sort of went, "Do you know what? I'm not talking to you. I'm done. I'm done. Like, how can you say those things to me after everything we've been through?" And then part of me was like, was she drunk when she said that? Did
Yeah.
that play into it? But I was still like, nah, I'm not having any of this. I don't want to talk to you if that's how you're going to treat me. So we became very, very distant from summer 2014 to about November 2015. And I remember coming home from work, and mum had said about, basically, she'd been around to see Hannah and she'd realised what had been going on and the extent of the drinking. And Hannah had sort of openly admitted that she'd been drinking. She'd lost her jobs. Any job she held down, she was losing.
Yeah.
She was still living with her partner, but the extent of the drinking started to come to light. And I remember every night after that, Hannah would ring constantly, wanting to talk to mum, wanting to talk to mum. And I remember one night, mum was like, "I'm too tired. I'm too tired to talk to her tonight," because these phone calls could go on for hours sometimes. And I took the phone and I just said to Hannah, "Mum's really tired. Um, can we speak tomorrow?" And Hannah was crying and sort of saying all these different things. And I was like, "I promise we will talk to you and we'll come and see you. But just please let mum rest." But I found and which I noticed throughout when we got more sort of involved with Hannah, was she was constantly repeating herself all the time. And I felt like I'd already said this, but I just had to sit there on the phone until she'd finally sort of accepted it, that mum had to go to bed. And I think one of the points to me was is a month later. So where I worked at the time, it was all to do with sort of like exploring like accidents and car accidents and stuff. And there'd been a drink drive accident where I worked. And I don't know what went in my head, but I sat there and I thought, thank God that Hannah hasn't done this. Like, she hasn't been caught. Got home from work that day, mum, Hannah's been pulled over for drink driving. And I was like, "You're joking?" Because this is the same day that
Yeah.
I've been at work with it. And obviously Christmas lead up, and she'd been pulled
Yeah.
over about 11 o'clock in the morning, and she was 4 times over the limit.
Bloody hell.
Um, and then she was obviously arrested. She was taken to the cells. And then the next minute she had a seizure because she didn't have the drink and the alcohol in her.
God.
So she ended up in hospital. And that was when me and mum looked at each other and we were like, shit, what how can she just have a seizure for not drinking?
Yeah.
What on earth is going on? And it transpired that Hannah was on 40 units a day. Um, and when I look back, 4 bottles of wine that she used to buy in co-op. Um, and it was that point where if she stopped drinking, she'd have a seizure and it could kill her. But if she continued to drink, it could kill her.
Yeah.
And that Christmas, December 2015, probably one of the worst Christmases. um, she left her partner so she was homeless, she didn't have anywhere to go. We were advised multiple times that we couldn't take her in. The extent of her drinking, she could put us at harm, and that she needed to reach rock bottom. And I remember thinking, what the hell is rock bottom? Like, what is it? Because
What's
surely
worse
if,
than this?
yeah. And I thought, I was like, but this is it. This is it.
Yeah.
And they were like, no, she was like, she'll carry on for a while. And they were like, this may be rock bottom to you, but it's not rock bottom to her yet. And I remember over Christmas, I'm sure it was Boxing Day when I look back, Hannah was ringing us and she was crying, saying she wanted to come home. And I was saying, I can't come and get you. I'm really, really sorry. And she was sort of sending me messages going, it's really cold out on the streets. And I'm like, I'm so sorry, I can't come and get you. And she finished the phone call with me and then she messaged me going, it's easier if I just die. And then she was like, I love you, always remember that. And I couldn't get hold of it. And I was sat there with my mum and I was like, have I caused her to go and think that she needs to end her life? And then has she done that? Or where is she? Like, is she going to be on the side of the street? And we were ringing and ringing because we had no idea. She could say she'd be somewhere, but then she'd be somewhere else. And then eventually we managed to get hold of her and talk to her. But I remember in those few hours, it was just this state of panic. And I was
Yeah.
thinking, is this me? Is this, should I, should we have taken her in? And I was conflicted because I felt awful inside because all I wanted to do was take her in and look after her. And then you've got her begging you to come home, and then you've got the professionals going, no, you can't, because to support an addict, you have to be strong enough to look after them and support yourself first. And it's all about boundaries. So there was me, and I was like, if I deal with it, mum doesn't have to say no to her. And I'm not putting mum in a position where she has to say no to her child. So if I take the hit and if I take it, then it might be easier. And and I look back, I don't know how I processed it. I don't
I,
know how.
I was just going to ask you, did these so-called professionals actually offer any support for you on how to deal with that?
No, no. And
No,
I found that a lot, that you would get told how to support the addict or how to support in certain ways, but when it came to me and my mum and our family, there was nothing. And I remember
nothing.
ringing so many phone calls, and someone said to me, we don't support the loved ones, I'm really sorry, we wish you the best. And I was crying down the phone to them saying, what can I do? And they were like, we're really sorry, we can't help you.
Oh my God, that's just hideous, isn't it?
Yeah, and
But
it was such a young age as well.
yeah,
I was 22 at the time as well when
yeah.
it really started to go 21, 22. Um, and all my other friends were going out, going to university, and then I was sat there trying to convince Hannah not to, harm herself.
And you took quite a lot of that responsibility before that as well, because as soon as you started to realize that she had a real problem with it, it becomes a kind of responsibility because you were so close, right?
Yeah, and I felt that she'd looked after me,
Yeah,
and now the tables had turned and that I had
yeah,
to look after her. And I remember um she was saying about money and stuff before any of this. And I was like, okay, well, let's have a look at your online banking. Like maybe we can see what's going on. We could, help you budget. And she just refused. And then we argued. And it was this, we'd
yeah,
reach a point with her, and it was obviously me pushing her too far
yeah,
because it was like I could be found out. So you'd get this reaction off her.
yeah. You become defensive, don't you?
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
can I ask as well, and this being nosy, the partner that she met, was he a drinker as well?
I don't know if he was a drinker, but I think there was a lot of like people that used to go around that used to drink as well. So
Right.
it was heavily in the house, and I think potentially that was the catalyst of it.
Yeah,
Uh,
enabling, a lot of
yeah,
enabling going on.
yeah, yeah. And I think there were comments about thrown by the partner at times saying Hannah's drinking a lot, but
Yeah.
wouldn't diverse any more information or like tell us about it anymore. Um, but yeah, so I think it definitely got more enhanced. And like at mum's, because I was living there was no alcohol in the house. I think there was a bottle of Tia Maria, and that was it.
Yeah.
There was never anything really here. And being in a village as well, where we were, there was nothing easy access either.
So when you got to talk to her, what did you say? And Did anything change there, or did you still stick to these boundaries?
I think we never took Hannah back in, so we stuck to those boundaries. And I still was really hurt by what she'd said previously, but I was putting it aside, and we'd sort of sit and talk. But from about that Christmas till April, it was so unsettled because we'd get her into places and then she'd just be out of them. And she stayed in a lot of hotels over Christmas, that we'd managed to get her into. And then we managed to get her into a women's shelter, and we drove her up there. And we were chatting to her and having these conversations, and silly, fun conversations, because as soon as you tried to broach, the topic of what
Yeah,
was going on, it was like shut down. And then it would get angry
yeah,
and she wouldn't do anything. And I remember we took her up there and she realized where she was and that we had to leave her. And I gave her a hug and she told me she loved me. And me and Hannah, I never said I loved you back. I just said, oh, I think you smell too. And it was something I've done from a child.
yeah,
And I remember saying that to her, and she sort of like just gave me this look of like, we're coming back. I don't, maybe she didn't feel as alone, or maybe, but it felt like this little step in our relationship coming back together. But I don't really think I ever had the opportunity to properly sit down and talk to her, because it was always so intense. If she needed to get to an appointment, I remember I had to take her to a doctor's appointment because we had to start getting like doctor's notes, because she was diagnosed with severe depression and then alcohol anxiety. um, and I was checking her bags because she asked me to get some tops out for her, and I opened this big bag and there was like 5 bottles of wine in it. And I thought, do I say, or do I just get her a tops, because
yeah,
I need her to get to that appointment?
yeah,
Do I need to start this argument right now, or do I just get her a tops, help her get ready and take her to this appointment? Because as much as I want to tip that alcohol away, if I tip it away, she's going to go and find it. She's going
yeah.
to go and get it. It's going to put her at more issues to go out there and be like, oh, I've now got to get more alcohol.
And she could have had a seizure as well.
Yeah, yeah. And I was like, no, I've just got to leave it. I'm just not going to say anything. I'm
Yeah,
going to cover it over. And I do remember she had a water bottle, and I did taste it because I thought it was vodka, but it was water. But that was how my mind was going.
yeah, suspicious.
Yeah, yeah. And she eventually got to another hostel in Chipping Norton, and me and my mum started going in and having coffee with her. And mum was doing that every week, going and seeing her and having coffee. And she never talked about anything. It was always what else was going on, like a distraction. And then eventually she said that she had to be moved to Oxford because there were more facilities. There was better support there for her to sort of not only just house her, but help in her recovery. And they got her to Simon House in Oxford, and she decided that she was going to refuse to stay there, stop drinking to prove a point, and smashed her face in as she had a seizure, and ended up in hospital. And we went to see her, and that was in the April 2016. And we went up, and Hannah was always like a very broad woman, like broad shoulders, like brilliant figure, like, busty sort of woman, so to speak. And
Yeah, yeah,
we saw her in this hospital bed, and she was like a skeleton. She was just, and I'd seen her previously, but obviously in clothes and big coats. But to see her in this little hospital gown, and her face, where she'd hit her side of her face, it was all swollen. She couldn't see out of her eye. Um, and it was just, it was hard. It was heartbreaking to see. And I just thought, how have we got here? And mum went and sat with her, and I went to the nurses and I said, she's not like this. She wants to become a teacher. She wants a cottage with a chocolate Labrador. That's not Hannah. That's someone else. Like, what has happened? And we just sat with her, and she was telling us that she was just going to walk into the woods and she was going to do this. And I just thought, I just sat there and I just thought, what has happened? How have we gone from laughing ourselves silly in the sofa in the conservatory to sitting here at her bedside, where she's not able to sort of comprehend what is going on around her. Yeah. And I come away and I just thought, after everything we've been through as a family, is, losing my dad, everything, why do we deserve this? What have we done wrong to have this on us? And I can still see her face. I can still see her. I can still see her in the hospital bed, and I can still see her face. And she just looked just so desperate. It
Broken.
was so hard. Yeah, yeah, completely
Broken.
broken. Yeah,
And that's the thing though, Amber. It's speaking from experience, alcohol stripped me of so much, and by the sounds of it, where she became homeless, you put your boundaries in place. She probably felt a sense of rejection there. She didn't understand it, but you were going by the professional advice you've been given. It's so layered, isn't it? But
yeah,
to be left with that vision, I remember when my mum, she fell and hit her head, and I went to see her in hospital, and I experienced exactly the same. She was like a skeleton, and I didn't even know it was her when I walked in the ward. I was like, "Where's my mum?" And she was
yeah,
laying there like a skeleton, and it stays with you, doesn't it?
yeah. And Hannah, she was just an extremely caring person. She's just brilliant. But she'd taken a dislike to the person opposite her bed, and she started, and it was just this old woman in her bed, and she started like shouting across the room at her, and I was like, Hannah, no, like, why are you doing that? Like, the old Hannah we knew would probably be going over and sat at her bedside and offering her a glass of water and chatting away. And I was like, what are you doing? You can't act like this. And I was like, when did I turn into a parent and Hannah
Yeah,
turn into a toddler
yeah.
where I'm saying, no, you can't do this.
She'd lost everything, hadn't she, by that
Yeah,
point?
yeah. And like, we're obviously trying our best. And then when you look back, I sort of think, could you have done this? Could you have done that? But we were so new into the situation, and it wasn't this drinking that we'd been aware of for such a long time. It was like slap bang in your face, here it
Yeah,
is,
yeah.
get on with it.
And you had no support to help you
No,
with that either, to understand it or to help you and your mum, you know, deal with your own emotions going through this as well.
no. And we were just at home, and I was mum was retired by that point, but I was trying to go to work and trying to live my life and keep everything going. And I remember there were some times when I was at work and I get a phone call from the police, I get a phone call from the hospital, my phone would go. Um, and I'd just have to put my phone away because I thought every time it vibrated or notification went off, I was like, I can't look at this because I don't know what it is.
Yeah,
And I've got like messages, and they're still on my phone now. And where I'd wake up in the morning and Hannah would just write, I had a paste in tonight when she was on the streets. And I'd be like, what do you mean? What are you okay? And all I'd get back was someone hit me. And I'd be like, who hit you? Why did they hit you? Where are you? And then I didn't get a reply for 6 hours later. And she was like, doesn't matter.
oh my God.
And like the anxiety
Yeah,
of that, and then having
yeah,
my phone next to my bed,
yeah.
and sort
Hyper
of
alert
checking it.
all the
Yeah,
time.
yeah, yeah, because you never knew. And I remember coming back from a work event, and I got a phone call, and it was social services. And I was like, I, I don't know. I'm 22.
Yeah,
I
oh
don't know what to
God.
say or what to how to help, or I'll go back. I'll go talk it through with my family. We'll see what we can do. Um, but I was completely lost. I
Mm.
completely lost in it all.
So the hospital bed, what happened after that?
So we managed to convince her to move to Simon House in Oxford, and we said that we'd got all her stuff and that we'd move it there, and we put in loads of like photos of us all, and that we'd do her room up and get it all sorted. So she did move there, but unfortunately with Simon House at the time, you had to have a key worker, and you had to sort out getting like sort of a certain many amount of benefits, and then those benefits would pay for like your room to sort of get people into the routine of having to be in a bit more structure, having to pay their way. And Hannah just wouldn't get on board at that point. Anything we tried to do to convince her, no, wasn't happening. And I remember it was my birthday in July that year, and she rang up, and she was somewhere in Oxford. It's like something going on, like music and stuff playing. She was chatting away, and I was like, "You all right? You know, blah blah blah." She's like, "Yeah, I've been evicted. I'm out. I'm on the streets." I was like, "Oh, why? Wow, they didn't want me." And then when you looked into it, it was because she wasn't paying away. But it was always this sort of blasé approach of, well, you know, this. And I was like, well, where are you going to stay? What are you going to do? Like, you know, oh, I've got a tent. Well, where have you got a tent? Oh, I've just put it in the park. I was like, you can't stay in a tent. We've got to get you somewhere. And then she's like, oh, it's all right. See ya. Happy birthday. And you try ring her back and nothing. And you're like, it was just constant, like these, just her dropping things. And then you were there like, what do
Holding the
we do?
ball. Yeah.
Yeah, what do we do? And there were periods during those few months where we'd go in and try and see her, and she wouldn't turn up. And I remember we couldn't get hold of her because she started using services at O'Hanlon House, which is part of Homeless Oxfordshire. So she started using the day services there, and she managed to ring us a few times. And we rang up one time. They were like, no, we haven't seen her in like a few days. Like she was always in, you know, getting her shower, getting her clothes sorted, having a bit of lunch or whatever. And they hadn't seen her. And this continued for a few days. And I remember going in with my mum and one of my friends, and we walked around Oxford for 4 hours trying to find her, and we couldn't find her. And we were just chasing our tails. And in the end, we had to give up because my mum was in her late 60s at that point, and the physical and the emotional toll of trying to find her. And we were asking people, and then people started saying that they owed her money, and then they wanted money off us. So then we were putting ourselves in these situations. So we had to get out. And we just come back and we were like, where is she? You
Yeah.
know, how can you just possibly disappear when potentially she had no money? You know, she's here somewhere, but where is she? And then the next day she had come back, and it turned out she'd just been keeping low for a while because of this money situation, and that people wanted money off her. So she'd been staying in a tent. But what I thought was not normal was normal to Hannah. So Hannah would have a bottle of wine for breakfast before coming to see us, and then be late when she was staying, when she eventually got her room in O'Hanlon House. And I was like, that's not normal to me, but this is normal to her. And she'd chat to her partner at the time going, yeah, he bought me a bottle of wine for breakfast. And I was like, how? Like, how
She
is
lost
that?
all sense of
Yeah,
reality, didn't she? Like it
yeah,
one day blurred into the next.
yeah. And then I'd be like, I've got to go, I've got to go to work, or I've got this. And she'd be like,
Yeah.
well, no. And I'd be like, I have to, because I'm in this time structure.
Yeah.
And like you say, it just, reality had just gone.
Yeah.
Um, but thankfully, in October 2016, she did get a proper room there because she was asthmatic as well. She always had been. So we had to sort of put in and try get a sort of an urgent room in there. And she did get housed in there. But because her partner wasn't in there and he was sleeping out, sometimes she'd still try and sleep out on the streets. And you had to try and get through to her that she had to stay in this room for her own health, because, you know, the addiction aside, she was severely asthmatic,
Yeah.
and being out in the freezing winter could set her chest off and she could have an asthma attack. So it's trying to get her to remember all these other things like of health that just didn't seem to like come into her world anymore.
God, this is a
Yeah.
difficult conversation, Amber. You know, I imagine there's going to be a lot of tissues listening to this episode. So that was 2016. Go on.
So the December 2016, we went in to see her on Boxing Day, and uh, she'd been ringing us on the Christmas day, and she'd been really, really upset. So O'Hanlon House had put on a Christmas dinner, got them presents, and it was like, you know, really putting on an effort, but she didn't want to be part of it. And she stunk of booze. Like, it was in her clothes, and I've never smelt something like it. And I remember, like, I went to hug her and it was like a wall. And if I could close my eyes now and sniff, I could probably still smell it. It was just so intense. And remember, we bought her a nice coat and boots, because we never gave her money because we didn't know where she'd spend it. So we would buy her things, we'd buy her toiletries or take in things for her. So, you know, she was kept warm and got what she needed. But we weren't sort of facilitating her going and buying any alcohol. So we moved into 2017. And then in the March, she moved back to Simon House because she'd sort of reached the top point of O'Hanlon House. And then it was like, oh, you can move across there now because you're more established. And I think from March, we started to see more of Hannah a bit more. She started turning up as Hannah. She started turning up on time. She was more interested in conversation. It wasn't just feeling like she had to turn up. And I'd split with my ex-partner at the Christmas as well. And I remember she was holding my hand and she was like, why didn't you tell me? And I just said, you know, I didn't want to trouble her. I didn't want this. And she held my hand and she was like, I'm always here for you. Like, you know, you come in and see me anytime. And it was, I think it took to that moment for us both to go, maybe we're coming back. Maybe Hannah's coming back round. And we sort of continued to see her like throughout April. And then it got to May, Mum's birthday, and she got Mum like a couple of nice little presents and stuff, and we did that. And then we went in to see her on the late May bank holiday on the Monday. And Hannah really wanted to have her photo album in to have a look through it. So we sat on the benches, the three of us together, and we were looking through all these old photos, taking the mick out of each other, having a laugh, looking at all the different sort of things we used to do. And it was a lovely day. It was normal. It was completely normal. And we went and bought her some sparkly sandals so she could have sandals for summer. And we just parted ways, and we gave each other a hug. And it was like me and Mum walked away and we were like, it was like a really nice day. And when we got home, I remember Mum going, but something isn't right. And I was like, she goes, I just have this feeling something isn't right. And I was like, well, maybe it's just because, you know, she seems more like Hannah, and maybe it's, you know, we're getting somewhere. And she'd been going to swimming classes, she'd been doing these little sort of empowerment courses. And we were like, yeah, that's you know, just be positive. And then 4 days later, she died. Her partner went into her room in the morning and she was having a seizure, which led to cardiac arrest. And by the time the paramedics got there, there was nothing more they could do. And I'm just thankful we saw her on the Monday and we had that last day with her. And everything we did afterwards, getting her stuff, and even the staff said on the Thursday night, she just seemed quiet. Like, she just didn't seem Hannah. And I don't know. Part of me looks back and goes, did she know? Was this all part of her goodbye? Did she know? Or I don't know. And mother's intuition on my mum's side. But yeah, and I just, it was weird because she died. But then I thought, no one can hurt her anymore. And she can't hurt herself. And I know where she is. And she's safe and she's at peace. And I don't think she'd been at peace for a long, 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 long time. And that's probably the only way I deal with it now, because she was only 38 when she dies. And I just can't. It's 6 years in a couple of weeks, and I just don't know where the time's gone. And I don't know how I've sort of survived without her, because she was just that rock.
Yeah.
To then gone.
I feel so sad for you and your family. What you say, there was part of you that felt a kind of relief. I can really hear that when Sarah Drage came onto my podcast and talked about her dad when he went that
Mm.
there was a relief there that he doesn't have to suffer anymore. And this is the responsibility you take on as someone who loves an addict, isn't it? It's like,
Yeah.
you know, I watched the Matt Willis documentary the other night, and Emma, you know, you could see the pain and the responsibility she had in caring for him,
Yeah.
you know? Um, and that's always a tough admission for someone, a member of the family or a loved one, to admit to that. You know, there's a feeling of relief because the responsibility you've had from such a young age has been immense.
Yeah. And
Um,
it just disappeared just
yeah,
like that.
yeah. And that's the difficult conversation, but it's honest. And I really appreciate your honesty there because it goes to prove what you've been through. And we could have many conversations around this area, maybe for
Mm.
another time. So she died at 38 years old, which is a tragedy. What came from that after that?
I think for me, um, I was determined that this wasn't the end because I thought, no, like she's gone, but she's not gonna be forgotten. Like I was so determined. And I think it opened my eyes up to addiction, to homelessness, and also to the lack of support that we got
Mm,
as family. And I just thought, I wonder if there's a way that I can change this or do something about it. And I remember that 6 months after that Christmas, I did a collection for the homeless shelters, getting in toiletries, and I did it all over work. And I got 48 boxes full of stuff. And I just seemed to go on this mission. And I was like, I can't stop this. What I was doing for Hannah and supporting her, I can't just let it go now. It's not over. And I went on to run a half marathon and raise money that way. So I must have loved her because I wouldn't do that for anyone else. But I went on to create Amber Lights in Oxford, which is like my little project, and it supports homeless Oxfordshire. And there's the different products that people can buy. And it supports homeless Oxfordshire in Hannah's memory. And I just wanted to create a space to talk about Hannah's story, Hannah's situation, and to show people that they're not alone. And, you know, Hannah had a flat, she had a degree, she wanted to become a teacher, she wanted a chocolate Labrador, and then this is what happened. So what's saying that this can't happen to anyone else?
mm,
And that was obviously the drinking that we were unaware of had creeped in, and we found lots of notes after she died, where she said that something had happened, so she started drinking, and she wrote too hungover to go to work. And we were like, that's probably why she lost her job,
yeah.
because this was creeping up. And we sort of got more of a picture afterwards. And I think for me, I don't think I'll ever let this drop, because Hannah deserved a whole lot more. And maybe if there'd been better support in place for her, better support in place for us, she might still be here. So I kind of want to use her memory to go forward and be like, this is Hannah's legacy.
Yeah, and you know, it's interesting how you frame that when you start talking about my little project. It's not; it's a huge project, and you should be so proud of yourself, Amber, because you're so
Thank you.
humble and lovely. Honestly, everyone I've talked to say, "Oh, she's adorable." No, they do, honestly. You know, I've just climbed that little hill in Morocco with Johnny Lawrence, and I know,
Oh, I love Johnny.
yeah, well, he loves you too. And, you know, I think what you're doing is incredible. So, and how can the listeners find out about this?
So I'm on Amber Lights in Oxford on Instagram, and I have some really cool clothing. So I have Skyline clothing, which is the Oxford skyline in day and night time. Um, and when someone purchases that, the profits support the welfare fund at Homeless Oxfordshire. We also have our handbags, which is the first thing we created, named after Hannah. And that's got the Oxford skyline design on. And when someone purchases one of those, the money goes to purchase toiletries. And then we have our Pawsome clothing, because Hannah loved dogs, and she saw a lot of comfort off the dogs that were also at Homeless Oxfordshire. So when someone buys Pawsome clothing, the money goes and supports the dogs who live with their humans at Homeless
Oh,
Oxfordshire.
that's
So
wonderful. That is
yeah,
so
so
wonderful. It's such an amazing thing you're doing. And how are you?
Yeah, I think coming up to the anniversary, and as silly as it sounds, it's actually on the Friday this year. So I keep playing things through my head, so I'll know that Monday, the bank holiday, was the last time I see her.
Yeah.
And I've changed as a person. It has changed me, but I have to keep fighting for her because I'm sure if roles were reversed, she'd be doing the same for me. And
Yeah.
she looked after me so well all that time, and I don't want to give up on her.
Oh, Amber, thank you so much for sharing this story. You know, it's hard to hear, but I think how you've dealt with it now and you've been amazing. And I think people absolutely love you on this podcast. And
Thank you for having me.
oh, it's been a real joy, and it's helped me get to know you more as well. You know, we've done a live before and that, but I'm just sitting here with goosebumps throughout the whole thing, and I'm just so grateful that you've shared this with us all. And I will put all your details on the show notes of this episode, and
Thank
let's stay
you.
in touch.
I'll see
And
you
if
on the 17th.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to that. That's going to be amazing. One of my socials, and we can chat then. And continue to do what you're doing as well. You're fantastic.
Thank you.
I'll see you then.
See you soon.
Bye, Amber.
Bye.